Hi, this is Erica of Grapefruit and Gardenia Designs and the Knit Kind podcast. Thanks for watching. You can find me on Ravelry as Knitty Elf 40, where I detail my projects and share a lot of the information that I'll talk about on the podcast. And on Ravelry, we also have a Knit Kind group for casual conversation about knitting, questions, and suggestions for episodes and so on. On the channel, you'll find a tab that has playlists. The playlists are organized into episodes, tutorials, guest appearances on other podcasts, and so on. And if you like the show and you'd like to consider subscribing, I would appreciate it. Let's see. We'll jump right in, and just a little reminder about the context of this podcast. It's not edited currently, maybe in the future, but it's really meant to be like sitting across from someone at your knitting group. I don't know, many people don't have access to a knitting group, a local yarn store, or they're at home with time limitations, or it's late at night. And so this is just meant to be casual conversation that you can enjoy, and hopefully we can feel like it's interactive. And in the future, I hope to have a couple guests on to chat with me as well. So what I'm wearing today is the Scandi Bloom Cowl by Heather Best of So Happy Jane. I have the DK version on. It is in her hand-dyed yarn. I used part of an advent calendar from a couple of years ago, and then one of my favorite tonal colors, Ross Poldark, which I think I've mentioned before. It's a Mobius scarf, or cowl, so it actually it's knit in a long tube with a twist and then seamed together at the end using a Kitchener stitch with a provisional cast on. So for those of you, I can take it off. For those of you who don't know how that looks, essentially it's never ending, if you will. It's almost like an infinity shape to it. And one of Heather's signatures is the stripes, which I love. So we'll see if we can get it back on. Okay. And for anyone who does like this, there is a new fingering weight version that's out. And another podcaster, Jana of Purl Together, is having a knit along right now. I don't think it's too late to jump in. So if you like this, you can do the DK weight, or you can do the fingering weight. And Jana is doing tips along the way in an online knit along. So definitely check that out if you like it. What I thought we'd talk about today are socks. Now, I never thought I would be a sock knitter, and I still don't think of myself as a sock knitter. But I'll tell you a little bit of a story, and you can decide if you've never knit socks, if maybe it's something that you'd like to do, or if you have knit them. This might even show you a new technique, even though, like I said, it's not my specialty, but I'm going to tell you how I became a sock knitter. So technically, my first sock was a Christmas stocking. And I made that Christmas stocking for my husband pretty early when I first started knitting, because my grandmother had always knit Christmas stockings for our whole family, and it was a tradition. And my husband was not super into me knitting other things for him. So I thought, a Christmas stocking, it's going to be there. It's meaningful. It's something that I'll appreciate, he'll appreciate. So that was my first sock. There was a little joke at my local yarn store at the time that I would at least learn to turn a heel. And I did, and I made a couple mistakes on it, but I really did actually learn to turn a heel from a Christmas stocking. So I think I'm going to do a whole separate episode on Christmas stockings, so I'm not going to show it today. And, I know not everyone celebrates Christmas, obviously, so it will just be around the holidays. Maybe I can find a way to incorporate a few other traditions. And if you have a tradition, please let me know, and I'll see if I can work it in. My second sock-ish thing was a baby booty, right? The reason I got into knitting was about nostalgia and about special gifts and meaningful gifts. And so I knitted baby booties. I actually did 2 pair, I think probably a year apart, for 2 different friends having babies. And the name of these booties is Christine's Stay On Baby Booties. I loved the story of these baby booties more than anything else. So I didn't pick them only because of the way they looked. I picked them because of the story behind them, which was told of this woman her name must have been Christine, who had this pattern that she just made over and over and over and kind of had it memorized. And then, like many people did, would just jot down when people said, how do you make them, would jot down the instructions. And so it's now on Ravelry, and there's a little bit more context. It actually talks about the original pattern, and then it tells a story as well as how in 1949 it was copyrighted in a publication called Fashions in Wool, volume number 68 by Hilda Fuchs. And so anyhow, I've made 2 pair of those. Not exactly socks, right? But sock-ish. And I thought, I'm never going to knit a pair of socks in sock weight yarn for an adult because, one, it's tiny needles, it's a tight gauge, and I tend to be a looser knitter, and you're going to use this beautiful, expensive sock yarn and wear it on your feet. It's going to wear out. It's going to get holes. Nobody's going to see it. It's going to take forever. Why am I going to do that? I'm probably not even going to make a great fitting sock, right? So I didn't knit socks for maybe the first 3 or so years of knitting. And then I attended a retreat, and one of the classes was toe-up socks. So I thought, great. As we talked about with how do you become a better knitter, trying new things. You don't have to love them. You don't have to repeat them. But if you try them, you might learn something and become a better knitter. So I took this opportunity to learn toe-up socks. And the teacher of that I want to mention, her name is Marceline Smith. She goes by Hey Brownberry. And I definitely suggest you looking her up. If you like to watch podcasts and you like a soothing voice, her voice, every time she starts her podcast, always kind of brings me down a level in terms of calmness. So I highly recommend her. And if you're interested in socks, she does have some great patterns and tutorials. So I started hers, which was really more of a recipe that we had for this retreat, where you learned the measurements of your own feet, how to make things their toe up, so you can make your toe symmetrical, asymmetrical, really fit your foot. And I had a yarn from a friend that had been gifted to me that she was not going to use from Sweet Georgia. It's a blue face Leicester wool, which is great for socks. And I think actually, I don't have it right in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it must be blended with nylon. So it's either probably a 75%, 25%, or an 80-20. These are my first socks. I actually did finish both of them. I say my first adult sock weight yarn socks. So it didn't take me a whole year to knit them, but it took me a whole year to finish a pair of them. So I knitted during the retreat, which was busy with other projects as well. I did an asymmetrical toe. So when I measured my foot and looked at it, I don't know if you will be able to see here, I've worn them quite a bit, but the inside of my big toe is a shorter curve than the outside of my foot. And so that's how I can always tell how to put them on too, but I sometimes put them on wrong. And so I made it during the retreat, probably partway up the foot, and I put them down. And then when I went back to them and I only had a recipe, I was a little bit lost. So I did go online and I found more vanilla sock recipes, which is just the term for kind of an everyday sock. And I found one I would recommend by Jo Torr, Torr. And it was so detailed and so perfect in the way that it was written, and I'm pretty sure it's also a free pattern, that I would read a few lines of this pattern and I would have a question in my head and I would say, okay, let's just go with the pattern. And as I went and as I read, she would answer the question that I had. So it's not that it was a super simple pattern. I mean, it was a vanilla pattern, but it was more that she anticipated. She must teach, and I'm saying she. I'm not 100% sure on that. So the Jo Torr would answer the question in your head. It was like the person was reading your mind, right? So perhaps is also a teacher. So the rest of these socks, they were really started with the Hey Brownberry cast on method for toe up socks, knitted partway through the foot, and then got to the gusset and heel. And I followed a combination of the Hey Brownberry to the Joe Torr. So the heel is a slip stitch heel. It wears great. They are comfortable. They fit my feet like a glove. And I've just washed all of my socks to store them for the winter, even though June in Massachusetts right now is a lot colder than it usually is. So I would like to put them on my feet, but I'm going to keep them away from the moths for the winter, all clean and put away. And so after that, what did I decide about hand knit socks? Did I just keep them in my bag at all times to knit them? No, I did not. For me, currently, that's sort of still the role that hats play. I used to almost always have a hat on the needles. Now I will have just different projects at different stages where I can try to have something that's quite portable at all times. But I know some people love socks for that reason. So what I did do is I did have a huge appreciation for hand knit socks, and I bought them from other people. So I wanted to mention a little shop here in Massachusetts called the Dedham Exchange. The Dedham Exchange comes from a history and tradition of women's exchanges, where women did not always have jobs and incomes, but had talents. And women's exchanges were started across the country to give women a way to earn some of their own money from talents and things that they were already doing, but to be able to have a marketplace to sell them in. So we do still have one in Dedham, Massachusetts. It is called the Dedham Exchange now. It has more than just consignments from handmade makers. It has men and women, and it also has some commercial things like Simon Pierce glass. There's a tradition of Dedham pottery and some other things. So if you have a chance to check them out, they're online as well as in person. If for anyone, I don't know if they ship internationally, but certainly around the country. And they actually do carry some of my knitted items as well. But I tell you more because I bought socks from other people. And so these are hand knitted. And it's a very similar look. Obviously, the toe is symmetrical because someone knitting them generally wouldn't know exactly the shape of your toe. But then otherwise the same structure with a foot, a gusset, a slip stitch heel. And then this one has a nice little cable up the side. They're soft. They fit me wonderfully. I love looking down at the colors. It makes me happy. And I think things that make you happy and smile, and someone put a lot of work into, are certainly worth paying for. So I did that. These weren't the only pair that I bought that someone else did, but I bought 2 pair of hand knitted socks from that same person over the years. And the other ones are cranked socks, some that have hand finishing and some that are all done on a circular sock machine. So I know many of you know what that is already. But for those of you who don't, the textile tradition, right, started, obviously there was hand knitting and hand weaving, and then machines came, and a lot of the machines haven't necessarily evolved in the same way, and circular sock machines are one where a hand knitter understands the value. I think probably people who are not hand knitters and who don't pay a lot of money for socks or wool or anything like that would probably think we're all crazy, because one of these machines from the company that is sort of the gold standard, which is Erlbacher, I want to say costs about $1,200, maybe even more with the different attachments and so on. It looks like a meat grinder a little bit, except all around the edges are hooks. And those hooks are what knit your sock in the round. And some people master it to actually turn their heel on that sock, and other people will knit a tube, cut into the sock, and do an afterthought heel. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a second. Again, not as an expert by any means, but just with some of the different experiments that I've done in my little knitting journey. So, let me see. These I wanted to mention because I bought these at one of the Wayland fiber shows, and these are cranked on a machine by someone who's known very well by other crankers. His name is Jim Grant from Good Karma Farm in Maine, where every year they have a crank in. So people bring their circular sock machines, or I think in some cases he lends them ones that he has on the farm, And it's like a 4-day event. Sometimes they even dye yarn, but they sort of learn sheep to sock, what does it take and how to use that circular sock machine and how to get new skills using that machine. So if you haven't had a chance and you're curious, definitely look on YouTube. There's some great videos of it. And there's even one I was just watching before this that shows a local news station in Maine covering the Crankin event. It's great. It's charming. And it made me laugh. It interviewed a woman who said she went from spending 30 to 40 hours hand knitting a pair of socks to 3 to 4 hours cranking a pair. I think most people would still be surprised that it would take 3 to 4 hours to crank a pair. So, it's interesting. It's interesting education. People who aren't knitters are probably still thinking we're all crazy. But there's something about the socks that once you start wearing them, sometimes they're that much more comfortable, and that's what it is. Sometimes there's just something about putting them on your feet that is emotional. It's not just about how much you paid for something or how it looks or how it feels. It's a whole experience. And so these were made on one of his circular sock machines, actually at the show that I was at. And he did turn the heel on it, which I got to watch because I really, at that point, don't think I was even aware you could turn a heel on a sock machine. It's different. It doesn't have, hopefully somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that there's any real gusset to here. This is just turning a heel on it. Then you have a little ribbing pattern at the top, and then he does this nice fancy hemmed cuff at the top. So those are my Good Karma Farm socks. And I believe it's all made from Good Karma wool as well. So that is farm to feet right there. So what else did I do? Well, a couple things. I had an inquiry from a fellow knitting friend who asked for some help with socks. So if she's watching this, hopefully I'll hear from her. She knows who she is. And she asked, could I help her sort of master sock knitting a little bit more? And I thought, oh boy, I've really only knitted one real pair of socks and a stocking and some baby booties. But I'm up for the challenge. Let's figure it out together. So what did I do? I learned about socks. If you like socks, or you want to like socks, or you want to know more about socks, this is the book for you. This book, I originally took it out of the library and then I bought a copy. It is Kate Atherley's book, and she has great books on other topics as well, including writing patterns for anyone who's a pattern designer. But what a definitive book on socks with every answer to every question you could ever possibly want to know. And also a lot of math. So if you're intimidated by it, take it slowly. If you're curious about it, jump in. If you have a particular problem you want to solve, this book tells you everything about why socks do and don't fit, what kinds might be right for you, how to solve the problem if you're knitting, you're following a pattern and something's just not right. So many charts with numbers in it, and then some really neat patterns at the end too. So Kate Atherley's book, Custom Socks, Knit to Fit Your Feet, has 15 patterns in it as well, but it's really more, how do I get it right? This is going to take, if you're a sock knitter and you have any problems at all, this will solve them and take them to the next level if you follow it. So that's what I got to help a friend out, and I learned a lot. And at the same time, I was taking another retreat class with an instructor. I believe her name is pronounced Safiyyah Talley. Safiyyah Talley has this book, Knit Two Socks in One. So again, for anyone who knows sleeves on sweaters and socks, there's one single sock syndrome, second sleeve syndrome, sleeve island, probably a sock island somewhere. So I thought, sure, let's try this, right? 2 socks in one. You're going to finish them together or you're not going to finish them at all. Let's give it a whirl. And so we did worsted weight socks. And this is when I discovered a yarn that could make me a sock knitter, because it was a huge splurge. But I said, if I'm going to do socks again, I'm going to knit with a yarn that just feels amazing. And so there's a yarn, Alegria Grande by Manos del Uruguay. It's almost an Aran weight, actually, I would say, more so even than a worsted weight. It is a sock yarn to put on your feet and say, this is why people fall in love with hand knitted socks. It is so soft and pretty and hard wearing, all of the things, and it's worsted weight. So it's going to take you half the time it would take you to knit a pair of sock weight socks or fingering weight socks, right? So these are the ones that I made. And again, I made both of them. Here's a difference. These socks, and this is the cool part, but also a part that isn't as customized necessarily. These socks get knitted almost like you had a circular sock machine in one giant tube. So actually you can see on the cover, see she is knitting one big tube, and you can also see these scrap yarns that are put in here. So what happened is we knit a giant tube, we put scrap yarn in certain places, and at the end we cut so you would have like a toe on one end, and you'd go all the way up and have a cuff on the other end. So when you cut that, the one with the cuff needed a toe, the one with a toe needed a cuff, and they both needed heels. And so with very clear instructions, although you have to be very careful where you cut, it is easy to make a little bit of a mistake and cut something that you shouldn't. But if you're careful, you will cut so that you will put in 2 heels, 1 cuff, and 1 toe. And what I learned about that is my feet fit better when there's a gusset. So if you look here, again, you can see there's no gusset here like there is on these hand knitted pair that I made. See this shaping here, right? That's the gusset. And this one doesn't have that. So for me, it was very tight here. Well, what I learned from other people who are truly sock knitters is that when you cut for an afterthought heel like this, and if I'm misusing that term, I just use that term for any that's going in after the fact. I know there are different styles of them, but if I have a tube and I'm cutting into it. So to put that heel on after the fact, one tip I learned is if this is too tight for your foot, instead of starting the heel shaping right away or when the pattern says, put in a few extra rounds of knitting even, and that will solve that problem for you, or at least make it better. So anyway, don't want to go too into depth, but that is a method and a yarn that I positively fell in love with. These were a little bit tight on me at first, again, mostly around this section, because you can see just holding them up, and when you look at your foot, you know, the shape, if I hold that up and then I hold this one up, see the difference? See how much wider this is here. And that's what affected the fit for me. Again, everyone's foot's different, and that's where that Kate Atherley book comes in of telling you what might work well and what might not work well for you. So, my first worsted weight socks. Then, as I was helping the person I mentioned with her socks, I decided, you know what, let's try some kind of hybrid, and let's do them 2 at a time. So again, the Alegria Grande yarn, which is just, I mean, I can't tell you, for a worsted weight sock yarn that wears really well and washes really well. I mean, yes, it is expensive and it's not in everyone's budget, but if it is in your budget and you're going to take the time to hand knit socks, think about it, because it will last as long as you take care of them. So these socks I did. This is, I think they called the Chia colorway. And then I got they sell some mini skeins. They had them at one of our shops locally on our yarn crawl, I think it was this year. And they had some just little mini skeins that you could do like toes and heels with, which was neat. And so I did these 2 at a time, which is casting on a magic loop. You have your 2 separate balls of yarn and you knit, you know, like the instep, and then the foot. I don't know. I don't know what it's, I'm drawing a blank, but essentially you're knitting like the top of a foot and the top of the foot and the bottom of the foot and the bottom of the foot, and you just go around. You have to make sure your 2 balls of yarn stay separate, but then when you finish, you're done with both of them. So it might take you, twice as long as to do one, but you will have that second one at the end, right? What a gift. And so, I didn't have it within reach, but I do have a sock blocker, and that worked really well. And so for these, I did my custom toe, went the length of my foot, and then I played around a little bit. It's actually a smaller gusset because I was afraid if I followed the same formula, I was going to have a huge gusset. And so it made my heel really small. But they fit great. And so ultimately, I didn't worry about my jog, as you can see. It's not, I didn't do the jog tricks, but can only do so many things at a time when I'm trying to learn new tricks, right? So this was this one. It is a gusset sock, 2 at a time, worsted to Aran weight, dreamy to put on my feet. And I didn't mention, but I did not believe this, but it is true. When you wear wool socks in the winter, and you're not wearing them out in the fields, doing hard work, but you're wearing them around the house or trips to the store, that kind of thing, you can wear them. I might go out on a limb here 4 or 5 times, maybe more. You do not have to wash them every time. You just kind of air them out in between. And believe it or not, when you have the socks from a store, your feet sweat in them and you can feel it almost right away. But the wool socks truly breathe in a different way with your feet, and you don't have to wash them every time. So kind of a little neat tip there too. So those are the socks that I made. I do have a pair of socks planned, and the yarn for it hasn't come, but you'll be shocked to hear that I did order. I saw one of our local yarn stores that is not really what most people consider a local yarn store, but if you go to Western Massachusetts, you'll see that Webs or yarn.com actually is a local yarn store. It's fascinating if you ever have a chance. So I do most of my yarn that I'm using for my own projects, I try to get from our hyper local yarn stores, and we have quite a few of them and are so fortunate. But I happened to be ordering some supplies for a workshop the other day from Webs, a workshop that I'm going to do at our local library, and I saw that they had that Alegria Grande Aran worsted weight on sale, and there was a pair of socks I wanted to do, and I had to get it. So that's an option for some of you who do have to order online. And I'm going to see if I can pull up the picture so I can show you the pair. Let's see if I can get it to come up really quickly. If I can't, I will just, here it is. It is by Wool and Pine. These are called the Hearth Home socks. And I just could not, when I saw them pop up, I am not a sock pattern buyer. And it was last year during the winter sometime. I just said, when I saw those come up, I said, regardless if I ever make them, I want to support that design. It's amazing. And I will make them someday. So maybe we can do a knit along if anybody else thinks those are just amazing. Because I feel like if I was wearing those at home while I was writing my patterns, knitting, doing laundry, it would make me smile. And that's what socks have done for me. So on that note, that is my little summary of my sock knitting journey. I hope that you enjoyed it, that if you're a sock knitter, maybe something there resonated with you, or you have advice for other people who aren't. If you're not a sock knitter, maybe you want to try now, or maybe you want to try to make a gift pair or something, some kind of inspiration. So by all means, let me know what you think of the socks, if you have any questions about them, if you've learned anything, or you have other insights you'd like to share. And I will just end really quickly with a finished object. I should have started with it, but at one point, I think I showed my whip, my work in progress of my latest. This is the Moraine pattern by tincanknits. This is the third one I've now made. Again, they're all detailed in Ravelry, but I do one craft fair a year. I somewhat do it in memory of my grandmother, who I did this craft fair with for many years. My mother's done it. My son's done it. I now am the volunteer who manages it. It's on Martha's Vineyard in the summer. And I try to make a showstopper, or what I like to call a showstopper, toddler sweater every year, because it just tickles my fancy to think that someone might put a little squirt in this and how beautiful and meaningful it can be. And not everyone has knitters in their lives. or if they do, not everyone can knit the same things or wants to knit the same things. And so for people who value this kind of gift, I like being able to put a certain number of those into the world every year. I just think it's special to me, it's special to them, and I love doing it. So this is the third one I've made. One of them, the first one ended up going to the Dedham Exchange, where again, it's a nonprofit, and the profits that they make benefit the community back through things like scholarships and grants. The second one I made went to a college friend for her daughter, and this is the third one that I've made. I've made all three so far in Malabrigo Rios. I think next time I might try something different, but I do love that a toddler can have a machine washable, even though I don't machine wash them. They are very much machine washable in a delicates bag on a gentle cycle with the right kind of wool wash, and then you air dry them. And of course, they can also be hand washed, but they really do. They wash beautifully. They wear beautifully. If you look at my Instagram at Grapefruit Gardenia, you'll see pictures of the little girl who got one last year wearing it out in the snow in Michigan in the fields when she was shopping for a holiday tree. She wore it all the time, and it made me so happy. So this is this year's. I did it in the colors teal, feather, and ivory. It shows kind of dark on the screen, but it is really a beautiful like green, blue, teal. And then I did the hat. I didn't want to do it matchy-matchy, so I sort of did complementary. So I did it as a little set, and I did a quick closed top on this, and I might put a pom-pom. I have to decide. But anyway, that's my finished object for this week. Thank you so much for watching. Knit kindly, live kindly, and I hope you'll join me again in the future. Take care.